So it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Paul M. Presley. He is the Director Emeritus of the Ossabaw Island Education Alliance. In this role, Dr. Presley conducts original historical research on people and communities of Ossabaw Island from the colonial period through the late 19th century. From 2005 to 2017, Dr. Presley was the director of the Education Alliance, and he served as co-editor for the following books: The Coastal Nature, Coastal Culture, Environmental Histories of the Georgia Coast, and African American Life in the Georgia Lowcountry, the Atlantic World, and the Gullah Geechee. And he is the author of On the Rim of the Caribbean, Colonial Georgia, and the British Atlantic World. And he's here giving us a little preview of another book he's working on. So, Dr. Paul Presley.
Thank you, Elizabeth. You know, I better turn this silencer off so it doesn't go off in the middle of my talk. Oops, there we are. Again, this is tremendous opportunity. I'm delighted to be here and see so many people and so many friends. I want to congratulate Ben and Lindsay on what they're doing. That is exciting. Yeah. We need to see more of that. And I'm going to have to read some of this, but I'm going to be looking up and telling some stories in between on this. You know, it's an honor to find myself standing before you, giving the annual address to the Ossabaw Island Foundation. And there's a lot for me to talk about. 12 years as director of the Education Alliance, the opportunity of knowing Sandy West and appreciating her almost mystical reverence for the island. By the way, when I was hired to be education director, I went out and saw her in 2005. She took me up into the second floor, the inner sanctum, and showed me all these wonderful things. And then she said, "Paul, I just want you to know I don't like technology." So I went back to my office in Savannah and opened up my computer. There were 2 emails from Sandy. But there are also other things to think about. The strong ties with Pinpoint and what that has mean. And then the chance to work with Elizabeth DuBose and Robert Gunn. With Robert Gunn so much. When I left my position at Savannah Country Day, I knew little about Sandy West and Ossabaw Island. I was a creature of the city. True, I had a 20-foot well craft and went down a couple of times a year to St. Simon's or flipped over to Beaufort. But I was a city boy. Then came a phone call from Zelda Tenenbaum, that force of nature from the legendary Tenenbaum family, which she said, "You are going to join the foundation's board. We need an educator." And of course I said yes. 12 months later, I was kicked off the board and hired as director of the Education Alliance. With the backing of the Board of Regents. That was a great, great event. It was a magnificent learning experience. Elizabeth was already far along in the conservation of the 3 tabby cabins built for enslaved people, one in the 1820s and the other 2 in the 1840s. There originally were 9 cabins there, approximately 65 to 70 people, and a total of 225 enslaved people in 1860 on the island. And my job, she said, was to interpret the buildings and the people for a larger audience. Now that's a tall order. The work of 2 archaeologists in studying the cabins, Dan and Rita Elliott, who I think are the 2 best archaeologists that have operated on the coast of Georgia, was a huge leg up for me, as well as the collaboration of the people of Pinpoint, Bo Bowens, Hanif Haynes, Gail Smith, among others. Bo Bowens came over and he lived in one of those cabins as a 5- and 6-year-old in the 1940s. And Bo said, "You know, we enjoyed that island. We lived there 12 months of the year. We thought that we owned the island. And when the Torrey family came down for 4.5 months in the wintertime, our parents said, make them feel like they're welcome because they are our guests." And Bo, in fact, the last comment Bo said was, "We still think it's our island." My formal education came from working with that half dozen of the nation's top African American scholars in that symposium of the foundation in 2008 that became the book African American Life and Culture in the Georgia Lowcountry. And from that experience, I wrote my own book. Throughout my work, I took heart from the observation of one writer: Black history can save white folks too. He was speaking about Martin Luther King and civil rights. But I think this idea makes sense for all of us and for any time period. The Black quest for liberty, for independence, for simple autonomy goes way back to the Revolutionary period. It's one that we can all identify with and learn from. That goes to the heart of the story of Titus. His life was all about self-determination, self-government, and emancipation. He was part of the movement of hundreds and eventually thousands of people of African descent who crossed the borders of Georgia into Spanish Florida and Seminole and Creek lands. Who was he? He was born around 1767. Titus grew up in a large family on Ossabaw Island where a Savannah merchant, John Morrell, had established 3 indigo plantations. His parents, Tom and Nellie, were part of several dozen enslaved people purchased from the estate of a deerskin merchant when had spent their early years in the deerskin trade in and around Augusta. John Morrell had purchased people not from Africa, not from the Caribbean, but these are already established families in Augusta and came to Savannah. Titus was the youngest and next to the youngest of those 7 children, 5 boys and 2 girls: Tiseh, Abraham, Job, Sappy, Phoebe, and Bacchus. By the time he came of age, and this is important, he spoke good English, was comfortable around white people, and enjoyed the security and support of a large family. Very much a Creole in outlook and upbringing. By Creole, I simply mean he was born in North America and not in Africa. He earned the patronage of John Morrell's son, John Morrell, in effect, Jr., who made him his waiting man on a new rice plantation acquired after the Revolution through the purchase of Loyalist property. That is, someone who had been a Tory lost that property. So now John Morrell has an indigo plantation on Ossabaw and a rice plantation on the Savannah River. At age 18, Titus made a choice. He rejected the life of a waiting man in a house where the Georgia Ports Authority now stands and took off with a friend from Ossabaw. The friend came from Ossabaw to guess where? Yamacraw. Morrell placed an ad in the Georgia Gazette. Titus, about 22 years old, 5'9", black complexion, regular features, formerly my waiting man and well known. The guy from Ossabaw and Titus managed to spend 8 weeks in this working class neighborhood where bars served both whites and blacks. Warehouses were common and slave pens were present. But they were caught, inevitably. Not to be held back, Titus escaped again, this time with a different group, including Hector, you see in that top ad, that's the second ad, the blacksmith on Ossabaw. And 4 men, including Hector and Titus, headed to Spanish Florida. Why Spanish Florida? And keep in mind, Spanish Florida includes both East Florida and West Florida. People forget that Florida was Spanish, not only from 1565 to 1763, but Spanish once again after the Revolution from 1784 to 1821. We all love St. Augustine. Everybody here has been to St. Augustine and the impressive Castillo de San Marcos. But on my last trip, I have to tell you, I was put off by the Disney-like atmosphere that threatened to bury the Castilian heritage. Spain was still a great power at this stage and had as much land in North America as the United States. Now, in taking back Florida from the British in 1784, Spain reinstated a policy originally designed to weaken the plantation system in the English colonies. And that policy offered freedom to those enslaved people who fled Georgia and South Carolina and converted to Catholicism. The idea was you would come down to St. Augustine, meet with the governor. He would give you some kind of a dispensation, place you under the protection of a white person, And then you would study with the priest the Catholic religion. And at the point where you converted sincerely, you received sort of your certificate of freedom. Simple as that. Moreover, the Spanish judicial system treated the black person as a legal personality with certain rights in a court of law, something that horrified Americans. As a matter of fact, you could actually be a slave and sue your master for mistreatment in a court, in a Spanish court. And not many did that, but some did, and some actually won. Over a 12-year period, Titus led 28 family members and friends to Spanish Florida, many from Ossabaw Island. He crossed international boundaries multiple times in defiance of all law. He set up 3 different communities where black fugitives gathered in hidden places, intending never to return to slavery, 1 in Florida and 2 in Georgia. He defied white authority at every turn, negotiated with the Seminoles, and finally returned to a wetland outside Savannah, and was last seen fighting the Georgia State Militia. Now, this is not a man that you would invite for tea at the Griff Line. Titus was a Maroon. The word comes from the Spanish word cimarron and was applied to wild cattle lost in the woods. The term has typically been used to describe runaway communities in the Caribbean or in South America. It was thought, until recently, that Maroon communities rarely existed in the United States. Research has now revealed how extensive they actually were. And I hope my book contributes to sort of that debate and kind of moves the goalposts further down the road. The term Maroon refers to people, 1, who chose to live in exile away from white people, who selected an inhospitable, inaccessible area in which to hide, who demonstrated extraordinary survival skills, and were willing to fight in self-defense on occasion. They were survivalists. And this is actually a drawing of a genuine Maroon, the only one that exists. His name is Osmond. He was in the Great Dismal Swamp, and drawn by someone from Harper's Illustrated. But you know, his name could be Titus. The first community that Titus initiated was in North Florida and lasted from 1789 until 1791. But Titus and 3 other men never applied to the Spanish governor for free status, never converted to Catholicism, and never embraced Spanish culture. They remained buried in the countryside, living on their own, true Maroons. After 2 years, the group was captured and returned to Georgia. Now, in Florida, he had tasted a life that spoke to the deepest aspirations and refused to accept becoming chattel property when he was carried back to Ossabaw. After 3 months, 12 weeks, he found an opportunity to escape from John Morrell and resumed his life as a permanent fugitive on the outskirts of settled communities. He received food from sympathetic slaves, raided plantations for supplies, and occasionally robbed people. The distinguishing feature was the incredible mobility of the man. He ranged from plantations along the Ogeechee River, passing by Ossabaw, to the rice plantations along the Savannah River, easily covering 50 miles or more in his jaunts. For 3 years, and you can read this on the ad, he was, in the words of his aggrieved master, quote, a known villain who has been concerned in most of the robberies committed on the inhabitants of this city and in the neighborhood. He was accompanied by his wife Nellie. Now he's married, and perhaps others. So this is the second Maroon community. Now here's where I really admire Titus and see the kind of a spark that really hit me. When he learned that the Morrell brothers were planning to sell several of his relatives to stave off an impending bankruptcy, he secured 2 boats large enough to hold 15 people, together with supplies of rice and provisions, clothing, and at least 1 shotgun. So he gave up after 3 years of traveling along the Ogeechee and Savannah River with Molly and others perhaps. He gave that up to take a chance and rescue 15 of his relatives to go back to Spanish Florida. 8 men, 4 women, and 3 children. Most of the participants were in their 20s. This is a young man's game or a young woman's game. One of the women, Beck, came with her child, who happened to be mixed race or mulatto. The chances are high she had been raped and saw a way out. Morrell advertised up here, the above Negroes carried with them a small two-oared canoe, their pots, blankets, and clothes, their dress, white plains, and are well connected in this country. They obviously had a second boat that was larger. This is a picture that was, image that was taken in 1899, and it gives you some idea. And on the coast of Georgia in the 1790s, it was not uncommon to see vessels, boats, canoes, with a fully black crew. And very often the captain was black. It was only in 1805 that Georgia State Legislature passed a law making it illegal to be black and captain of a boat. Was this going to be a new maroon community? We will never know. The boat landed on Amelia Island. Unbeknownst to them, a Spanish garrison had received orders to arrest all fleeing slaves. Titus and his compatriots put up a serious fight. One man was badly wounded, but within minutes the outgunned freedom seekers surrendered. Titus broke out from where he was being held and made it 5 miles down the road to a band of Seminoles, 10 to 12 people, men, women, and children. The plantation owner set out a slave hunter with 2 English hunting dogs, and they went to the Seminoles and said, "You've got to turn them back over." And they said, "Okay, we will," for money, which they did. But they brought him back, and because they considered him something of a hero, they didn't tie his hands. When Titus got back standing in front of the house, the overseer said, "Go in and I'll talk with you." Titus pulled out a knife and said, "I will gush your guts out." Well, it didn't work, and he was captured. Titus spent 2 years imprisoned in the Castillo de San Marcos in St. Augustine. He tried to escape, was caught, and put on half rations. Then in 1797, he made a second attempt and succeeded. Now, how many of you have visited the castle and seen those dark, dank rooms buried beneath the thousands of pounds of masonry and think about spending 2 years there? But somehow he did it. And what did he do with his unexpected freedom? And this part I can't understand. If anybody can explain it to me, please do. He headed back to Savannah, along with several men that he recruited along the way. Titus was always with a group. This guy was a leader. He was motivated. He motivated people. They just naturally followed him. And he always said, one of them quoted, who was captured, says, "He told me he would give me a better way of life." This brings us to the third maroon community. In July, a federal agent stationed in St. Mary's reported that, quote, "the notorious fellow Titus, with some Negroes from Florida, made their way along the seacoast until they got into Savannah River and among the rice plantations where he was well acquainted. There, Titus soon formed a party with some other outlying Negroes who became very troublesome to the people by plunder and as a receptacle for runaways. Within short order, this quintessential maverick had created a wholly new community around the rice plantations on the Savannah River. Maroons in the neighborhood joined him, and runaways began to appear off of plantations, with the group evolving into an unstable community whose survival depended on raiding nearby plantations at a time when a network of support had not yet been built. You know, I think the man was absolutely angry, and he sort of lost his sense of caution at this point, and he did something just, in your face kind of a opposition. Within short order, a company of the Georgia militia was dispatched with orders to kill those who did not surrender. Well, that's the swamp that he was in. Although they discovered and fired upon Titus' band, most of the Maroons actually escaped, quote, "it being a very thick swamp." Trackers, presumably with dogs, headed into the marshes and managed to capture several people. Titus disappears. There's no more record. We don't know what happened. Charismatic, bullheaded, blessed with an indomitable spirit, he had made the sanctity of his own group of Maroons his primary focus. At the beginning, he led a community built around the conventional model of men creating a highly gendered society in a place of safety. He led a second community where the family was paramount and women and children were present. In the third and last iteration, he created a short community that became a magnet for runaways and other maroons. Why is the life of Titus significant? Now, this is what brings us here. This is a great story. I mean, this is a movie of some kind, I think. But this is more than that. Is this just a story about one man's incredible exploits in an oppressive age? Not at all. His life speaks to the kind of underground that existed in the Southeast from the American Revolution to the First Seminole War, 1784 to 1818. Of course, I am speaking in metaphorical terms, but during that period, hundreds and eventually thousands of black people in Georgia and to a lesser extent South Carolina crossed the borders that separated the Low Country from the Spanish in coastal Florida from the Seminoles. They were incredible risk takers, willing to flee to places where different languages, different cultures, and different people required radical adjustment in their lives. They were willing to fight. On 2 occasions, black Georgians in organized units fought white Georgians in Florida and won. Don't really hear about that in the history books, do you?
No.
These people played a recognizable role in the balance of power politics in the Southeast. In conclusion, this epic story, long neglected, constitutes a powerful counter-narrative in American history, a tale of how black people found freedom and human dignity, not in Jefferson's empire of liberty, but outside the expanding boundaries of the United States. Their constant movement across borders and boundaries serves as a potent reminder of the strength of black resistance in the post-revolutionary South. The flight of people like Titus marked the closing act of a chaotic 18th century where empires struggled for position and native peoples resisted. In a larger sense, the story marks the passing of the torch of liberty from the generation of the Revolution to those who belong to the era of the Underground Railroad, a grand connecting arc that stretches over a 40-year period. And in conclusion, I want to go back to that statement by the writer. Black history can save white folks too. You know, the life of Titus, I think, shows that. And I am pleased to be able to argue in my book there was an Underground Railroad headed south 40 years before there was an Underground Railroad headed north. And that Ossabaw Island played a distinct role in that. Thank you.
We have a few moments for questions. Okay, here's a question.
Paul, how did you come upon this story?
How did you come upon this story, Paul?
It was because of Elizabeth. I found the ads for Titus and for another person called Hercules. And I wanted to find out a little bit more about it. And I went to the Georgia Historical Society. Of course, Todd Rosen's cheering me on. And you look at these deed books, and they look so hard to read. But I just kept reading through, and I found the purchase of Titus's family in 1763. And it's 59 enslaved people that John Morrell purchased. And it gives their names and the family structure. And that really got me going. I said, there's something there, we can do this. The key to it, though, was the Spanish government gave all of its papers in 1821 to the U.S. government. And they're now known as the East Florida Papers in the Library of Congress. And I found a report from the military officer responsible for North Florida in 1795. That thing about Titus and the boat on Amelia Island and going to the Seminoles, and just that knife and trying to cut his guts out. It's just very descriptive. But it's bits and pieces. This book, what I'm proudest of, is taking bits and pieces and trying to put them together and make sense out of them. This is not any one big thing. And I want to wait to see how, if historians, professionals think that I made a convincing argument or not.
Anybody else?
Have a question for Paul? Okay.
When do you expect your book to come out? Or-
When do you expect the book?
Well, thank you. It was supposed to be here tonight. The problem was I turned in my manuscript 3 months late, and they published it 6 months after that. So this I think I dropped out of the schedule. But it'll be, you can go online and you can pre-order it, and you can read and see exactly what it's all about. But that's great.
Question? Bring it to you.
Just a short question, Paul. Does Titus have anything to do with Mingo? From my understanding, he was a renegade as well, right?
Mingo, the answer, Gail, is I don't know. You can speculate. There are so many. I think that Titus did know about Hercules, who escaped during the Revolution, and was still. Anyway, it's a network. These families stayed connected. It's very important to understand family structure, and that's what's so hard. Now, that's enough questions. I want to show you one. Oh, wait a minute. Here's a question. No, go ahead. I don't want to keep you all too long.
Did the United States acquire Florida in 1819 in order to stop the Southern Underground Railroad? Was that a motivation?
It was part of it. It was the First Seminole War was very hard, and part of the reason for this, Andrew Jackson invades Florida, another country, Spanish colony, in part to stop the flight of enslaved people to that. And, you know, it's very complicated. It takes there's so many layers to it. It involved the Creek natives as well. Yes. Just shout it out.
Hi, it's Jessica.
Hey, Jessica.
Hi. I have a question. I remember this was like years ago with the Telfair when they were doing the symposium on enslaved and freed in Savannah, and somebody gave a paper on the Morel community that was Hutchinson Island, right? Wasn't Hutchinson Island one of that? Was this part of that? I mean, I think the idea of I know that the work that was doing in the Distal Swamp in Virginia, but I think the idea of the multiple of Morel communities here is really something that a lot of, I mean, could do with a lot of research, but it's pretty exciting.
But I don't know the answer to that, Jessica, but I do know that the Morels were you know, for example, the rice plantation on the Savannah River, there was a few miles up, but I don't know. Short answer.
But you think there were a number of them?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Some Maroons went north in Georgia, right?
Yes, you know, the thing is, it's kind of tricky because when we look at what happened from 1830s to 1850s, and the flight north, you know, a wonderful book has come out on that married couple, fled from Macon, and she, you know, dressed up as a man and made her husband her enslaved person, and managed to get out, and ended up in England, and eventually after the Civil War they came back and lived in Savannah, incredibly enough. So yes, there are examples, and you've got, you know, First Baptist claims that there are enslaved people that escaped that way. I'm not sure that's true, but you know, it's a great story. All right, yeah, one last question.
Hi, Simona Perry. So, have you found any evidence that anything that they were doing was inspired or brought on by the rebellions that had happened in South Carolina in the 1730s and 40s?
Yes,
The Stoner Rebellion?
absolutely, absolutely. That's chapter 1.
Awesome.
Yeah, I want to just stop here and just to let you know, this thing is really leading to some things that who would have thought? But I had a phone call 18 months ago from George Dawes Green, whom I've never heard of, George Green. And he says, you know, I'm writing this novel, it's going to come out this summer, Kingdoms of Savannah, and it's a murder mystery. It takes place in the 21st century, but it's the last 50 pages deal with an archaeologist who is mixed race, and she discovers a maroon community, 18th century, 1780s, on the Savannah River, Bear Creek Island. And I understand your chapter 2 is on Mohammed, who died in the final battle with the Georgia State Militia, 1787. And I said, wow. He said, come on, let's have a cup of coffee at the Sentient Bean. What more do you want than a cup of coffee with the novelist at the Sentient Bean? So he enrolled me in this, and I ended up talking with him in various places, including the Brooklyn Public Library. So we have a group together, and Sylviane Diouf is the recognized expert on the whole question of marronage. He had written a book, Slavery's Exiles, the story of American Maroons. And she has joined with us. And in April of last year, we went out, the 14 of us. This is Bear Creek Island is now part of Savannah Wildlife Refuge. It was acquired in 2017. It is, I will tell you, it is a swamp. It is untouched. It's been logged, but that's the only thing. And that the 5 of us are trying to raise money through foundations in New York. We're already talking to them about an expedition. And Fish and Wildlife is absolutely thrilled that we try to do this. And in April, we went out there and walked through there, looking for signs of what might be flat lands where they could have established. It was a fairly extensive thing. What made this maroon community worth going after? It was the largest maroon community, 100 enslaved people, not enslaved, 100 fugitives in the 1780s. The longest lived, 1782 to 1787. And the only one that used military tactics, because some of the Maroons had served the British as soldiers in the siege of Savannah in 1779. And it really gets interesting. So we wondered, we think if we can do a dig and find some artifacts and then recreate something good is going to come out of it.
Wow.
But one of the nicest things is, the man on the left-hand side is Matt Hudson. He's a writer from the New Yorker magazine. And George Green sort of brought him down. And this article, it was an article searching for a fortress built by people who escaped slavery. Its ruins are somewhere in the swamps of Georgia. What will it take to find them? I love this image that this artist, New Yorker artist, and Elizabeth and Robin got it. And somebody sitting behind me said, I want a print of that, because the more you look at it, things begin to pop out of this. And you see the heads, but look in the water. So my next goal is to get a print for her and for me. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, everyone. We are dismissed.